Around 900,000 years ago, early humans first arrived in what is now England. They were hunter-gatherers, living off the land by hunting animals and gathering plants. These early people lived during a time called the Ice Age, when much of the land was very cold and covered in ice. As time passed, the ice melted and the land changed. Around 8000 BCE, England became an island as the sea levels rose, separating it from Europe. People began to settle and use stone tools to hunt and build simple shelters for protection from the weather. By around 4000 BCE, farming arrived in England. People started growing crops and keeping animals like sheep and cows. They built large stone structures like Stonehenge, which were possibly used for ceremonies or to mark important events like the changing seasons. Between 2500 BCE and 800 BCE, a new period called the Bronze Age began. People learned to make tools and weapons from bronze, a mixture of copper and tin. They built round houses and lived in small villages, trading goods with others nearby. Around 800 BCE, the Iron Age began, and people started making tools and weapons from iron. They built strong hill forts for protection and formed tribal communities. These tribes often fought each other for control of land and resources. In 55 BCE, the Romans arrived in England led by Julius Caesar, but they did not stay long. Almost 100 years later, in 43 CE, the Romans returned and began a conquest of England. They built roads, towns, and forts, changing the way people lived forever. Roman rule lasted for nearly 400 years, bringing new ideas, laws, and ways of building. Towns like London, Londinium grew, and many people adopted Roman customs. By 410 CE, the Romans left as their empire was under attack elsewhere, leaving England to defend itself. Chapter. After the Romans left, tribes from Germany and Denmark, like the Angles, Saxons, and Jutes, came to England. They settled and created small kingdoms. Over time, these kingdoms grew larger and became the early foundations of modern England. Christianity began spreading in England during the 6th century when missionaries arrived. One of the most famous was St. Augustine, who converted many people to Christianity. Churches were built and religion became a central part of life. By the 9th century, Viking raiders from Scandinavia began attacking England. They stole treasures, burned villages, and even settled in parts of the land. Eventually, a great leader named King Alfred the Great defended England and united parts of the country. After King Alfred, England continued to grow and unite under different kings. In 1066, the famous Battle of Hastings took place. William the Conqueror, a duke from Normandy in France, defeated King Harold and became the King of England, starting a new chapter in its history. William the Conqueror became king in 1066 and brought big changes to England. He introduced the feudal system, where land was divided among nobles, and ordinary people worked as farmers. Castles like the Tower of London were built to protect the land and show power. The Normans also created a detailed record of England in the Domesday Book. This book listed all the land, animals, and people to help William control his kingdom. It showed how organized and strong his rule was over the country. Over the next few hundred years, England grew in power and size. Kings ruled with the help of nobles and church leaders, but there were often struggles for control. The church was very powerful and influenced many parts of life, including education and law. In 1215, King John signed the Magna Carta, a famous document limiting the king's power. It ensured that even the king had to follow certain laws and respect the rights of nobles. This was an important step toward democracy and fair government in England. The Middle Ages were also a time of war and conflict for England. The Hundred Years' War with France lasted from 1337 to 1453. Although England won many battles, like at Agincourt, they eventually lost much of their land in France. During this time, the Black Death arrived in England, killing millions of people. This terrible plague spread quickly and changed society as there were fewer workers. Many poor people began demanding better pay and rights, leading to social changes. The Wars of the Roses were fought between two royal families, the Lancasters and the Yorks, from 1455 to 1487. These battles ended when Henry Tudor became King Henry VII. His marriage united the two families, bringing peace and starting the Tudor dynasty. Henry VIII, one of the most famous Tudor kings, ruled from 1509 to 1547. He is best known for having 6 wives and breaking away from the Catholic Church. This created the Church of England and made the king the head of the church. His daughter, Queen Elizabeth I, ruled during a golden age known as the Elizabethan era. England became very powerful, defeating the Spanish Armada in 1588 and growing rich through trade. This time was also famous for the arts, with William Shakespeare writing his great plays. In the 1600s, there were struggles between the king and parliament over who should have more power. This led to the English Civil War in 1642. King Charles I was defeated, and England briefly became a republic under Oliver Cromwell. After Cromwell's death, the monarchy was restored, and King Charles II took the throne. But tensions remained, and in 1688 the Glorious Revolution took place. King James II was replaced by William and Mary, who agreed to rule under a constitutional monarchy. The 1700s saw England becoming part of Great Britain after uniting with Scotland in 1707. This time also marked the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. New machines, factories, and inventions changed the way people worked and lived. By the 1800s, England was the center of a global empire, with colonies in many parts of the world. Queen Victoria ruled during this time, known as the Victorian era, which was a period of great progress and expansion. However, it was also a time of hardship for many poor people. In the 20th century, England faced major challenges, including 2 world wars. During World War I, millions of soldiers fought and died, and society changed greatly. Women gained more rights, including the right to vote, as they took on roles traditionally held by men. World War II was even more devastating, with bombings destroying cities like London. After the war, England rebuilt and became part of international organizations like the United Nations. The National Health Service, NHS, was created to provide free health care for all. In the later 20th century, England faced economic changes as industries declined and new technologies emerged. Immigration brought many people from former colonies, creating a diverse society. England became a key part of the European Union, but also kept its unique identity. In recent years, England has dealt with modern challenges such as climate change and debates over its role in the world. Brexit, the decision to leave the European Union, was a major turning point. It showed how England continues to shape its future while remembering its long history. To expand and enrich this history, let us dive deeper into key periods and add more detail. Each time in history brought unique changes, struggles, and discoveries that shaped England. We will continue explaining these events clearly to reach the depth of understanding you wish. After the Roman withdrawal, England became a land of small kingdoms ruled by Anglo-Saxons. These kingdoms included Wessex, Mercia, and Northumbria, and each had its own rulers. People mostly lived in small villages, growing food and raising animals to survive. The arrival of the Vikings in the 9th century brought terror and change. Vikings came in longships, raiding towns and monasteries for treasure. Some Vikings, however, stayed and settled, blending their culture with the Anglo-Saxons. Being King Alfred the Great of Wessex became a legendary figure during this time. He defended his kingdom from Viking attacks and built forts for protection. Alfred also encouraged learning and helped create a shared identity for the English people. So, after Alfred's time, England became more unified, but new struggles emerged. In 1016, a Viking king named Canute ruled England and brought stability. However, in 1066, the death of King Edward the Confessor without an heir led to conflict. William the Conqueror's rule after the Norman conquest reshaped England forever. He redistributed land to his Norman supporters, building castles to secure control. Norman culture mixed with Anglo-Saxon traditions, influencing the English language and law. In the Middle Ages, life for ordinary people was tough. Most were peasants working under the feudal system, giving a portion of their crops to landowners. Towns grew slowly and marketplaces became important centers for trade and community. The church played a central role in life, with priests teaching about heaven and hell. People built great cathedrals, like those in Canterbury and York, as places of worship. Pilgrimages or journeys to holy sites were common during this time. The Crusades also began during the Middle Ages, with English knights traveling to the Middle East. They fought in religious wars to reclaim lands considered sacred. These journeys exposed England to new ideas, goods, and cultures from faraway places. So, when the Black Death struck in the 14th century, it changed everything. The disease killed about 1/3 of the population, leaving empty villages. With fewer workers, peasants demanded higher wages, weakening the feudal system. The rise of powerful monarchs like Henry VII marked the end of the Middle Ages. The Tudor period brought stability after years of civil war. England's kings and queens began strengthening their power, reshaping politics and society. The Protestant Reformation. During Henry VIII's reign was a major religious upheaval. England broke away from the Pope's authority, forming the Church of England. This led to years of tension between Catholics and Protestants in the country. Queen Elizabeth I's reign in the late 1500s brought a sense of national pride. Exploration and trade expanded, with sailors like Sir Francis Drake circumnavigating the globe. The arts flourished, and Shakespeare's plays became some of the greatest in history. During the Stuart period, the struggle between the monarchy and Parliament intensified. King Charles I's refusal to share power led to the English Civil War. After his defeat, he was executed, and England briefly became a republic. The Glorious Revolution of 1688 was peaceful but transformative. It established Parliament's authority over the monarchy, leading to a constitutional system. The Bill of Rights guaranteed certain freedoms, setting the stage for modern democracy. The Industrial Revolution in the 18th and 19th centuries turned England into a global power. Factories produced goods faster, and railways connected towns and cities. People moved to industrial centers, creating bustling towns like Manchester and Birmingham. This period also brought challenges, including poor working conditions in factories. Reformers fought to improve workers' lives, leading to new laws for safety and fair treatment. Education became more widespread, with schools opening for more children. The Victorian era saw England at the height of its empire. Queen Victoria ruled for over 60 years, during which Britain controlled lands across the globe. Advances in science, medicine, and technology improved life, though poverty remained widespread. In the 20th century, England became involved in two world wars that changed the world. During World War I, soldiers fought in muddy trenches, and many lost their lives. Afterward, society began to change, with women gaining the right to vote. World War II brought even greater challenges as German planes bombed English cities. People showed great bravery during the Blitz, enduring hardship to protect their country. After the war, England focused on rebuilding, and the NHS was created to provide health care. The Romans came to England in 55 BCE, led by Julius Caesar, but they did not stay long. In 43 CE, they returned and began a full conquest, bringing their armies and building towns. They named the land Britannia and made it part of the Roman Empire. Roman roads connected towns like Londinium, now London, and helped trade and travel. They built forts, bathhouses, and walls like Hadrian's Wall in the north to protect their borders. The Romans also brought their laws, language, and ideas to the people of England. Many people in England adopted Roman ways, such as wearing Roman-style clothes and using coins. They worshipped Roman gods, but later Christianity began spreading across the land. Roman rule lasted for almost 400 years, making big changes to daily life. In 410 CE, the Roman Empire was weak and under attack, so Roman soldiers left England. Without the Romans, the people of England had to defend themselves. Tribes like the Angles, Saxons, and Jutes came from Germany and Denmark, settling and creating kingdoms. Centuries later, the Vikings arrived in England, starting in 793, with a raid on Lindisfarne, a monastery. They came in longships, attacking towns and stealing treasure, causing fear across the land. Some Vikings settled in England, farming and living alongside the local people. The Vikings controlled a large part of England called the Danelaw, where their rules and customs were followed. Many place names in England today, like York, come from Viking influence. Over time, Vikings mixed with the Anglo-Saxons, shaping England's culture. King Alfred the Great of Wessex became a hero for defending his kingdom from Viking attacks. He built strong forts and made peace with some Viking leaders. Alfred also encouraged learning and helped create the idea of a united England. Vikings continued to come, and in 1016, a Viking king named Canute ruled England. Canute kept peace and united different groups under his rule. Eventually, Viking power faded, but their influence remained, leaving a mark on English history. In the 1100s, England was ruled by Norman kings who had taken over after William the Conqueror in 1066. The Normans brought a strong feudal system where land was controlled by nobles, and peasants worked for them. Castles were built everywhere to show power and keep control. Henry I became king in 1100 and worked to make the government more organized. He created a group of officials to manage taxes and laws, helping the country run better. Under his rule, towns began to grow, and trade became more important for people's lives. After Henry I died, there was a fight over who should be the next king. This led to a civil war known as the Anarchy, which lasted from 1135 to 1153. During this time, people suffered as nobles fought each other for control of the land. Eventually, the war ended and Henry II became king in 1154. He was a strong ruler who reformed the legal system, creating courts and common laws that applied to everyone. These changes helped England become more stable and fair for its people. Henry II also faced trouble with the church, especially with Thomas Becket, the Archbishop of Canterbury. They argued over who had more power, the king or the church. This conflict ended tragically when Becket was killed. shocking people across England. By the end of the 1100s, England was becoming more united and stronger. Richard the Lionheart became king in 1189 and spent most of his reign fighting in the Crusades. While he was away, his brother John caused problems at home, leading to future conflicts. In the 1200s, King John ruled England after his brother Richard the Lionheart. John's rule was unpopular because he raised taxes and lost lands in France. In 1215, angry nobles forced him to sign the Magna Carta, a document limiting the king's power and protecting their rights. The Magna Carta was very important because it said the king must follow the law like everyone else. It also gave people more say in how the country was run. Over time, it became the foundation for England's ideas of justice and democracy. After King John died, his son Henry III became king, but his rule was also troubled. He often argued with powerful nobles and borrowed money to pay for wars. This led to the Barons' War, where the nobles rebelled against the king. Simon de Montfort, one of the leaders of the rebellion, created an early form of parliament in 1265. He invited not just nobles, but also common people to join and give advice on running the country. Although Simon died in battle, his ideas shaped England's government. By the end of the 1200s, Edward I became king and brought stability to England. He was known as a strong ruler who expanded the kingdom by conquering Wales. Edward also called regular parliaments, making the government more organized and effective. During this time, towns and trade grew, and life began to change for many people. Guilds were formed to protect workers, and markets became centers of business. Though most people were still farmers, England was slowly becoming a more connected and prosperous land. In the 1300s, England was ruled by strong kings like Edward III. He started the 100 Years' War with France in 1337, a long conflict over who should rule parts of France. The English won important battles, like Crécy and Poitiers, using new weapons like the longbow. During this time, life was hard for most people, especially peasants who worked on farms. They gave a large part of their crops to landowners and had little freedom. Many lived in small villages and rarely traveled far from home. In 1348, a terrible plague called the Black Death arrived in England, killing millions of people. It spread quickly and wiped out about 1/3 of the population. This caused a shortage of workers, which changed the way people worked and lived. With fewer workers, peasants began to demand better pay and more rights. In 1381, they started a rebellion called the Peasants' Revolt, led by Wat Tyler. Although the revolt was crushed, it showed that ordinary people wanted more fairness and freedom. The 1300s also saw the growth of towns and trade, with wool becoming very important for England's economy. Merchants sold English wool to Europe, making some people very rich. However, the gap between rich and poor remained wide, and life was still a struggle for many. By the end of the century, England was changing, with new ideas about work and fairness spreading. The church was still very powerful, but people began questioning its role. These changes would shape the future of England in the centuries to come. In the 1400s, England was still recovering from the Black Death and the effects of the 100 Years' War. The war with France continued, but England started losing land, including Normandy. By 1453, the war ended, and England had lost most of its territories in France. At home, a series of conflicts called the Wars of the Roses began in 1455. These were battles between two noble families, the Lancasters and the Yorks, over who should be king. The fighting caused chaos and suffering, as families and towns were caught in the struggle. During this time, Henry VI was king, but he was weak and often sick, which led to instability. The York family, led by Edward IV, gained power and took the throne. Later, his brother Richard III became king, but his reign was short and full of controversy. In 1485, the Wars of the Roses ended with the Battle of Bosworth Field. Richard III was killed, and Henry Tudor became King Henry VII. He married Elizabeth of York, joining the two families and bringing peace to England after years of conflict. In the 1400s also saw important changes in trade and learning. The printing press was invented, which made books cheaper and ideas spread faster. England's economy grew stronger, and merchants began trading more goods with Europe and beyond. By the end of the century, England was more united and looking to the future. The Tudor dynasty began with Henry VII, marking the start of a new chapter in England's history. The peace and stability allowed the country to recover and prepare for the changes ahead. In the 1500s, the Tudor family ruled England, starting with Henry VII, who brought peace after the Wars of the Roses. He strengthened the country by managing money well and making alliances with other nations. His son, Henry VIII, became king in 1509 and is one of England's most famous rulers. Henry VIII is known for having 6 wives and breaking away from the Catholic Church. He wanted a divorce, but the Pope refused, so Henry created the Church of England. This change, called the Reformation, caused tension between Catholics and Protestants in England. Henry's daughter, Mary I, tried to return England to Catholicism when she became queen in 1553. She earned the nickname Bloody Mary because she punished Protestants harshly. Her reign was short, and in 1558 her sister, Elizabeth I, became queen. Elizabeth I ruled during a golden age known as the Elizabethan era. She kept peace between Catholics and Protestants and strengthened England's navy. In 1588, her forces defeated the Spanish Armada, showing England's growing power in Europe. During Elizabeth's reign, trade and exploration expanded, with explorers like Sir Francis Drake sailing the world. The arts flourished, and writers like William Shakespeare created plays and poems that are still famous today. This period brought pride and progress to England. But by the end of the 1500s, England was a stronger and more united country. It was becoming a global power, with colonies and trade spreading its influence. The changes during this time set the stage for even greater achievements in the future. In the early 1600s, Queen Elizabeth I died without an heir, and James VI of Scotland became James I of England. This started the Stuart dynasty. James believed in the divine right of kings, meaning he thought he had the power to rule without asking Parliament. James I's reign faced many challenges, including conflict with Parliament over money and power. He also faced tensions with Catholics and Protestants in England. These problems grew worse under his son, Charles I, who became king in 1625. Charles I wanted to rule without Parliament, which led to a struggle for control. In 1642, this disagreement turned into the English Civil War. The war was fought between the Royalists, who supported the king, and the Parliamentarians, who wanted more power for Parliament. The Parliamentarians, led by Oliver Cromwell, won the war. Charles I was captured and executed in 1649. Afterward, England became a republic, ruled by Cromwell as Lord Protector, but this was not a peaceful time. Cromwell's government was harsh, and many people did not like it. When Cromwell died in 1658, the monarchy was restored in 1660 with Charles II. His return brought joy, but England still faced struggles over religion and the power of the king. The late 1600s saw even more changes. In 1685, James II became king, but his Catholic beliefs worried many Protestants. In 1688, Parliament invited William of Orange to take the throne. In what is known as the Glorious Revolution, James II fled, and William and his wife Mary became rulers. The Glorious Revolution led to the Bill of Rights in 1689, which limited the king's power and protected the rights of the people. This helped create a more balanced government. England was on its way to becoming a constitutional monarchy, where Parliament had more control. In the early 1700s, England was ruled by the House of Hanover after Queen Anne died without a direct heir. The first Hanover king, George I, came from Germany and did not speak English. This caused some confusion, but Parliament began to gain more control over the government. The 1700s saw the rise of the British Empire, with England expanding its colonies in America, India, and the Caribbean. Trade grew, and the country became richer from selling goods like sugar, tobacco, and cotton. However, this wealth was built on the labor of enslaved people in the colonies. During this time, the Industrial Revolution began to change England. New machines were invented, and factories opened in cities. People moved from farms to cities for work, and England became the world's leading industrial power by the end of the century. The Industrial Revolution also led to poor working conditions. Many factory workers, including children, worked long hours for little pay. Reform movements began, with people demanding better treatment, better pay, and safer working environments. In the 1700s, England was also involved in many wars. The most important were the wars against France, known as the Napoleonic Wars, which lasted from 1803 to 1815. England helped lead the fight against Napoleon Bonaparte, who wanted to control all of Europe. In 1707, the Act of Union joined England and Scotland to form Great Britain. This helped create a stronger, more united country, though Ireland remained separate. However, in the late 1700s, there were growing tensions between England and Ireland, which would continue into the next century. By the end of the 1700s, England had a growing empire, a booming industrial economy, and a rising middle class. Yet, there were also many problems, including poverty and inequality. These issues would eventually lead to important social and political changes in the 1800s. In the 1800s, England saw huge changes because of the Industrial Revolution. Factories grew, and new machines made work faster and easier. Many people moved from farms to cities to find work, changing how people lived and worked. The Industrial Revolution made England very rich, but it also caused problems. Workers, including children, worked long hours in dangerous conditions for low pay. Reform movements began, and new laws were passed to improve working conditions and protect workers. During this time, England became the world's most powerful empire, controlling large parts of Africa, Asia, and the Americas. The British Empire grew through exploration and colonization. This made England rich, but also caused harm to the people in the colonies. In 1837, Queen Victoria became queen, and her reign lasted for 64 years. The Victorian era brought many changes, such as better education, new inventions like the train, and improvements in medicine. But it also saw great poverty for many people, especially in cities. Social reforms became important during the Victorian era. Laws were passed to improve public health, working conditions, and education. The poor laws tried to help the poorest people, though many were still left struggling. The 1800s also saw the rise of political movements for more rights. People fought for the right to vote, and in 1832, The Great Reform Act gave more people the ability to vote. In the 1860s, even more people, including working-class men, gained the vote. At the same time, new ideas like socialism and feminism started to grow. Reformers like Charles Dickens wrote about the harsh conditions faced by the poor. Women's rights groups fought for better rights, such as the right to vote and work. England also faced wars during the 1800s, including the Napoleonic Wars and the Crimean War. These wars affected the economy and led to the loss of lives, but they also showed the power of England's military. The country became more connected to the rest of the world through trade and travel. By the end of the 1800s, England was changing rapidly. The empire was vast, but people were also calling for greater fairness and equality. The Industrial Revolution had made England a world power, but it also created many social problems that needed to be solved. In the early 1900s, England was still a powerful country with a large empire. However, life was changing quickly. New inventions like cars, airplanes, and telephones made life easier, but also brought new challenges. World War I started in 1914, and England was heavily involved. Millions of soldiers from England fought, and many died. The war caused a lot of damage and left the country in debt, changing society forever. After World War I, England faced many problems. The economy struggled, and many people lost their jobs. The government tried to help, but life remained hard for many working-class families, and there were protests for better rights. In 1939, World War II began, and once again, England was involved. This war was even more destructive, with bombings in cities like London. Despite the challenges, England stood strong, and the war eventually ended in 1945, but it left the country devastated. After the war, England began to rebuild. The government set up the National Health Service, NHS, in 1948 to provide free health care to everyone. The economy slowly improved, and people started to enjoy better living standards. During the 1960s and 1970s, England went through many social changes. Music, fashion, and art became more modern and exciting. Young people started to speak out for their rights, and there was more freedom and acceptance of different lifestyles. In the 1980s, under Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, England's economy changed again. Many industries were privatized, meaning they were sold to private companies. This caused both growth and hardship, and some people lost their jobs as a result. By the end of the 1900s, England had changed a lot. The country had faced 2 world wars and many social changes. It was no longer the empire it once was, but it had grown into a modern, diverse, and global nation. England had many colonies all over the world, starting in the 16th century. These colonies were areas that England controlled, often far from its own borders. The British Empire grew as England took control of lands in places like America, Africa, Asia, and the Caribbean. In the Americas, England established colonies along the eastern coast, like Virginia and New England. These colonies were used for farming, trading, and gaining natural resources. Many settlers moved there, and the colonies became important parts of England's empire. In the 1700s and 1800s, England began to control large parts of Africa, India, and Australia. These colonies provided valuable resources such as cotton, gold, and tea. England's navy protected these areas and helped bring wealth back to the country. England also built strong trade networks through its colonies. Ships carried goods like sugar, tobacco, and spices back to England. In return, England sent products such as cloth, guns, and tools to its colonies, making trade a key part of its power. However, not all colonies were happy under British control. In America, many colonists wanted more freedom and less control from England. This led to the American Revolution, where the American colonies fought for independence and won in 1783. In India, England controlled the land for many years, but there were many protests against British rule. Indian people fought for their independence, and after years of struggle, India became free in 1947. Other colonies also gained independence during the 20th century. The British Empire began to shrink after World War II, as more and more colonies gained independence. By the end of the 1900s, England no longer had the same large empire, but it still had strong relationships with many former colonies. These countries are now part of the Commonwealth, working together as a global community. World War I started in 1914, and England was part of the Allied powers fighting against Germany and its allies. The war caused massive destruction, with millions of soldiers and civilians dying. England sent many soldiers to fight in Europe, and the war lasted until 1918. The war left England in a difficult position, with many people dead and the economy weak. After the war, the country struggled to rebuild, and life was hard for many families. The effects of the war led to social and political changes across England. World War II started in 1939, when Germany, led by Adolf Hitler, invaded Poland. England and France declared war on Germany, and soon other countries joined the fight. This war was much larger and more destructive than World War I, with millions of people killed across the world. In World War II, England was heavily bombed by Germany, especially its cities like London. This was called the Blitz, and it caused great damage but did not break the spirit of the people. England's Navy, Air Force, and Army fought bravely, with the help of allies like the United States. England also played an important role in fighting the war in North Africa and Europe. The country stood firm against Germany, especially after the Battle of Britain, where England's Air Force defeated the German Luftwaffe. By 1945, Germany was defeated, but the war caused great suffering. After World War II, England had to rebuild once again. The country's economy was weak, and many buildings were damaged. The government created the National Health Service in 1948 to provide free health care to everyone, helping to improve life for many people. World War I and World War II changed England forever. The wars led to the loss of colonies and a shift in world power. But England's role in both wars also showed its strength and helped shape the world as we know it today. The latter half of the 20th century saw many social and cultural changes. Immigration from former colonies enriched England with diverse traditions and communities. Music, fashion, and art flourished, with bands like the Beatles gaining worldwide fame. The process of decolonization reduced England's global empire, but it remained influential. Joining the European Union connected England with its neighbors, though debates about its role in Europe grew. The Brexit vote in 2016 was a major turning point, leading to England's exit. Today, England faces both challenges and opportunities in a fast-changing world. Issues like climate change, technology, and global relations shape its future. England continues to honor its rich history while building a modern identity for the generations to come. Modern England is a country with a rich history and a diverse population. It is part of the United Kingdom, which also includes Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. England has a strong economy and is known for its cities like London, which is a major global center for business, culture, and finance. Today, England is a constitutional monarchy, meaning the country has a king or queen, but their powers are limited by law. The current monarch is King Charles III, but Parliament makes most of the important decisions. This system helps to balance the power between the people and the monarchy. England's economy is one of the largest in the world, with many industries like finance, technology, and entertainment. The country is home to famous companies, universities, and cultural institutions. Many people work in offices, while others are employed in fields like healthcare, education, and retail. In recent years, England has faced challenges like Brexit, where the country voted to leave the European Union in 2016. This decision has had a big impact on trade and relationships with other countries. It has led to debates about England's future and its place in the world. Modern England is also very diverse, with people from many different backgrounds and cultures. This is reflected in the food, music, and festivals that are celebrated throughout the country. Immigration has shaped England, and the country continues to evolve as people from around the world make it their home. Education is important in modern England, with many schools and universities offering high-quality learning. England is known for famous universities like Oxford and Cambridge. Education helps young people prepare for the future and contributes to the country's success. England is also known for its beautiful countryside, historical landmarks, and vibrant cities. People enjoy visiting places like Stonehenge, the Tower of London, and the English countryside. These sites show the rich history and cultural heritage that continue to shape England today.